Well, good morning. As Ron said, my name is Kara. I'm a candidate for ordained ministry in the Dakotas Conference of the United Methodist Church on the deacon track. And I felt like it would be appropriate to share a little bit more about how I got here today before I preach. And so about 5 years ago, I moved from South Dakota to the DC area to attend Wesley Theological Seminary. And had the full plan of going back to South Dakota as soon as I graduated in 2021. But as it turns out, God sometimes, or maybe all of the time, has other plans. And it's in these past few years that Adam and I have been attending Severna Park UMC, that I've been working at the Big Bean in Severna Park as a barista. And really discerning like what my call to ministry is. And through that process, through y'all helping me, through the Big Bean helping me, Adam and I have discerned that our goal is to open our own cafe as a place of ministry that shares love and hope with the community, one cup at a time. Thank you. Anyway, so I shared this with Ron maybe about a month ago, and said that this is the year. I am going to be submitting my paperwork to the Dakotas Board of Ordained Ministry to start the commissioning and ordination process of becoming a deacon. And Ron came back about a week later and said, "Great, do you want to preach in 2 weeks?" And I have to say, at first I was quite nervous about coming up with a whole sermon in 2 weeks when I haven't preached in about 3 years. But I looked across my living room and saw the word community, which is the star word that I had chosen for myself. And I started thinking about how the ways in which I've preached before have formed and built community in my life. And then started thinking about how the call of a deacon is to create to bring the church and the community together. And so it seemed like an appropriate challenge. So with that, will y'all pray with me? Gracious God, may the word of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be pleasing to you, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Now, if you've been worshiping with us for the past month or so, you may have received a Star Word. You'll know that we are in a Star Word sermon series. And if you're like me, you may have noticed an unintentional or potentially intentional theme across the words that have been chosen. About this, in the second week of the series, Nauri preached on covenant and talked about how we are baptized into a community together. That when we are baptized, we join a community. In the third week, Ron preached on authentic, and I think if he could have had 2 words, it would have been authentic community. He shared how being authentic builds community and builds relationships with one another. And then last week, Ron preached about how we have been a resilient community in coming back from the pandemic. Now, maybe you, like me, have picked up on this thread and potentially started wondering, what does community actually mean, and what does that look like? And more importantly, why do I hear about community in every single sermon? Well, friends, I believe that the book of Genesis actually has some of these answers for us. So in Genesis, we find 2 creation stories. The first creation story is in chapter 1, the one that we're all familiar with, right, where God creates. God is busy creating the land and the water and the lights and the sky. God creates grass, trees, stars, night, day. God creates buffaloes, lions, rhinoceroses, crabs, whales, seagulls. God creates all of these things and calls them good. But God isn't done creating yet. God isn't satisfied with good. And so God creates humankind, both man and woman, in God's own image, and God blesses the people and calls creation very good. This first account of creation in Genesis 1 focuses on the process of creation unfolding before us. It's almost as if God is speaking from afar, creating order out of chaos in a carefully structured plan. What we find in the second account of creation, in Genesis 2, what was so beautifully read for us today, we see that the seeds and shrubs and plants are all ready to go, and yet no plant has sprung up because there's no water and no one to work the ground. The seeds lay patiently waiting for God to create. So God creates man out of dust. Now, I almost imagine God kind of getting down and dirty with creation and having a little fun while creating the human out of clay. Maybe someone like playing with Play-Doh. And God takes this newly formed lump of clay and breathes the breath of life into its nostrils. And I can almost imagine God, like the crazed doctor who brings Frankenstein to life, yelling, "It's alive, it's alive!" Friends, it's here in Genesis 2 that we see how God desires a relationship. We see that God's relationship with humankind is up close and personal. When God breathed life into humanity and gives them a place to live in the garden. We see in Genesis 2 that we were created for community right from the start, and that the first time that anyone has experienced community is with God. But in that garden, God looks out and realizes that the human that God has created needs something else, or rather, someone else. And so God gets busy creating again. And it's good. God says in Genesis 1 6 times that creation is good, that it is good. But it's not until Genesis 2 that God says for the first time that something is not good. In Genesis 2:18, we see that it says, "It is not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." God sees that this human needs a partner, a friend, a community. And so God gets busy creating again. And God creates another human, a woman, to be a partner, a friend, a companion. And this discovery of God's shows that humans are social creatures who thrive in a close relationship with one another. For those of you who are asking, I did ask my husband, who's an introvert, and he said that yes, even introverts need social interaction to thrive. Since the very beginning, we were created to be in community with one another. It's part of our DNA to desire relationship with God and to long for community with other human beings, a relationship to encourage, to help each other, and to share life together. Now, I have to say is at this point, when I was writing my sermon, that I kind of took a step back and said, I don't know where to go from here. And I was struggling and kind of debated ending my sermon right here. And then I kind of took a step back, went to work, and started asking people that came into the Big Bean, what does community mean or look like to you? Most people said it's a place where people gather, or it's where I feel like it's my home away from home. Some people described events like tree lightings and food giveaways and cookouts and Bible studies, scouts, yoga classes, and times where I meet my friends for a cup of coffee. A lot of people said it's times where I meet my friend for a cup of coffee. And Ron asked this to the kids earlier today, right? Like he asked if I was taking notes. I actually did take a couple of notes because I really liked some of the kids' answers. One said togetherness, and another said it's where we live and care for each other and help. I loved hearing all of these responses because every time I asked the question, it brought a smile to the other person's face as they started thinking about the various communities that they are a part of. And I also loved that it was a question that everyone could answer easily based on the different activities and organizations that they were involved in. I did, however, have one favorite response. And this response came from a regular who we talk about books a lot together. We often talk about like, what are we reading? What's a new author? What's something to read? And she had asked me if I had read any of Kent Nerburn's work. And I told her that I had, and then we started chatting about how we love how he ties spirituality into his writing. And this regular told me to look up The Cab Ride That I'll Never Forget by Kent Nerburn, because this is what defines community for her. And I thought it would be appropriate if I shared that story with you. Years ago, Kent drove a cab during the night shift for a living, and he never expected this job to be a ministry. One night around 2:30 in the morning, he got a call to pick someone up from a dark building except for a single light on the ground floor. Now, most cab drivers under these circumstances would honk once and drive away. But Kent knew that so many people depended on taxis as their only means of transportation. So, unless he sensed danger, he would go to the door to see if the passenger might need help. And so Kent went up and knocked. Just a minute, a small, frail voice called out, and after a long pause, a woman in her 80s appeared at the door with a small nylon suitcase. She was wearing a pin dress and a hat, just like someone out of a 1940s movie. So Kent she asked, "Would you be able to carry my bag to the car? And then if you could come back and help me, I feel like I need a minute alone and I'm not very strong." Kent took the suitcase to the car, returned to the door, and slowly helped the woman to the cab. Over and over again, she kept thanking him for his kindness. "It's nothing. I try to treat all passengers the way I would want my mother to be treated," he said. When they got to the cab, she gave him the address and then asked, "Do you mind if we drive through downtown?" "It's not the shortest way," he answered quickly. "Oh, I don't mind," she replied. "I'm in no hurry. I'm on my way to hospice." Kent looked back at the rearview mirror, and as her eyes glistened, she continued, "I don't have any family left. The doctor says that I should go there because I don't have very long." And so Kent reached over, shut off the meter, and said, "Where would you like me to go?" For 2 hours, they drove all around the city. She showed Kent where she worked as an elevator operator, where she and her husband lived after they first got married. And they stopped at a furniture warehouse that had once been a ballroom where she had gone dancing as a little girl. As they drove up and down the streets all over the city, sometimes she asked him to slow down, sometimes she asked him to stop, and sometimes she'd say nothing at all. But Kent knew that every place they drove by was special to her. As the first hint of sun hit the horizon, she suddenly said, "I'm tired. Let's go now." They drove in silence to the address that was given to Kent, and when they arrived, 2 staff members came out as soon as they pulled up. They clearly had been expecting her. Kent opened the trunk, took the small suitcase, and brought it over to her. "How much do I owe you?" she asked. "Nothing." She replied, "You have to make a living." And Kent said that there are other passengers. Almost without thinking, Kent bent down and hugged her. She held on to him tightly, and the hug ended with her saying, "You gave an old woman a moment of joy." "Thank you." Kent squeezed her hand and then walked out into the dim morning light as they took her inside. For the rest of his shift, Kent drove around aimlessly, lost in thought. He kept thinking, what if someone else had picked her up? What if I had declined to take her on the run or had honked once and drove away? What if I had refused to engage her in conversation? And how many other moments like this have I failed to grasp? Since that night, Kent has often wondered if that was the most important thing he'd ever do. Simply sharing a few precious hours with a delightful woman so that she wouldn't be alone. Friends, this is the community that we are created for. We, like Kent, are created to show love, compassion, and kindness to complete strangers. We, like Kent, are created to take time to help someone in need. We, like Kent, are created to journey with someone so that they might not feel alone. And friends, I think that this is a great thing for us to try and do this week. I can tell you that by engaging in more conversations this past week at the Big Bean, by simply asking people, what does community mean to you? I have felt more joy than I have in a while. So I encourage you to ask yourself, what does community mean to you? And engage in it. Maybe for you, that's starting a conversation while you wait in line for a cup of coffee or a table at a restaurant. Maybe it's volunteering at winter relief or greeting the person that you don't know at church. Maybe it's joining an organization or a club that you've been thinking about, or starting a Bible study, or bringing donuts to work. Whatever it is or wherever it is, may each of us show others that they are loved and valued by being involved in the community that we were created for. Amen.